Good afternoon and welcome to this month's Research Matters. I'm Erica Salzik, the Department Administrator for UT Southwestern's Human Research Protection Program, and I will be one of the moderators for today's session. Before we jump into the presentations, let's cover some general housekeeping items. First, if you have any questions for our presenters, please type them in the Q&A. One of the moderators will respond to you during the session, or we will address it at the end of the presentation. This session is recorded and will be available immediately after the conclusion of the live session. You may access the recording by clicking the same link provided in the Outlook appointment. Shortly after the conclusion of this session, we will send out any slides and/or handouts via the listserv. In addition, you can access the recordings and documents on HRPP's Research Matters website, which can be found under the Training and Resources page. We do provide a certificate of attendance for those who have logged in using a valid email address. If you do not receive one via email but should have, please send an email to hrpp@utsouthwestern.edu to request a certificate. And lastly, we want to hear from you. So we are interested to know what topics you would like us to cover during these sessions and how helpful today's session was. We are also interested to know how our office is doing. So please take a few moments to complete the survey to provide feedback. I have provided a QR code that will allow you to scan and complete the survey on your phone. And I will also be dropping the link for the survey in the Q&A in just a moment. So here's our agenda today. We will begin with just a brief update on our vacancies, followed by a presentation from the Regulatory Support Office, and then we will hear from Liz Owens, who will continue our how-to series with continuing reviews. And we will conclude with any questions at the end. So here are our open positions. We have one senior regulatory analyst that will sit on the IRB team. We have a regulatory analyst under the Reliance team. We also have a regulatory scientist on the regulatory support team. And then we still have a clinical research educator that is supported by the CTSA grant. So if you have any questions about any of these positions, you are welcome to reach out to me. I'm Erica Salzik, or you can send an email to Rondo Leppo as well. So we are going to jump into our next presentation. Erica, why don't you go ahead and get your slides going?
Thanks, Erica. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eriko from Regulatory Support Office. I work with Resija Nambia to support clinicaltrial.gov reporting. So today I'm finishing up on how-to series on clinicaltrial.gov. So we talked about how to register and report results in ct.gov, and then I introduced resources that are available in our website. And Resija talked about how and when to do the annual updates and how and when to modify the existing ct.gov record. So last few research matters, we have been talking about how to avoid common pitfall. So we discussed first 10 common pitfall and gave tips and recommendations to avoid common mistakes. And so I am finishing up on this series with last but the most troublesome pitfall during ct.gov registrations. So which is unclear outcome measure. So as you know, there are 12 sections to complete when you do the ct.gov registration. So most sections are straightforward, but outcome measure section, which is today's topic, is difficult for some people and then often come back with stipulation. So I think this section is a little bit difficult because NIH does has a very rigid or I guess scientifically rigorous definition of outcome and an outcome measure, and has very specific requirement for how they want to phrase the outcome measure. So, but before that, I want to review why do we have to register outcome measure first. I think it's important to understand why. So, there is several reasons. So this can be from ethical obligation to research participants, right? And in 2013, Declaration of Helsinki has called for registering every research study involving human subject and the outcome measure results. And the design of all studies should be publicly available. So ct.gov is the place for that. We also have obligation to be transparent with our study. So ct.gov, again, is the place for that. So the trial needs to have a high scientific validity, right? Both internal and external. Trials should be able to be replicated, which requires defining clear outcome measure or endpoint. Reporting of the results should not be just cherry pick, right? All guidance and clinical decisions should be based on the evidence. So historically speaking, we have seen it in clinical trial that there has been cherry picking the data. For example, scientists, largely from pharma industry, change the outcome endpoint in order to cherry pick the data and then hiding unfavorable result. So in response to that, Congress took this issue seriously, and outcome reporting is now required by law for applicable clinical trial. And if your study gets audited by the FDA, and if your trial is out of compliance, you will be facing serious monetary and civil consequences. So I have not seen one yet at UT Southwestern, but FDA started issuing a pre-notice letter of non-compliance to the PI at other institutions since last August. And if you want to publish clinical trial results, so today over 3,000 journals follow ICMJ policy, so which is a publication policy, which require clinical trial to be registered before the first patient enroll. Otherwise, your submission will be rejected. And say you did register, right? So, but very important to note that journal editors are comparing original outcome measures that were reported in the ct.gov and outcome measure reported in the manuscript. And if journal editor identify any discrepancy between manuscript and ct.gov entry, which will raise a red flag for publication bias, so only reporting favorable significant outcome. So editor will be asking you for the explanation for the discrepancy. And reporting accurate outcome measures in ct.gov also gives a unique opportunity to do the secondary analysis. Because the results of these trials are publicly available, so many scientists around the world are conducting secondary analysis using your data. So you really want to report only accurate information there. And there are many other regulatory bodies are requiring reporting outcome measures accurately and timely for funding, billing, publication purpose. So I want to highlight NIH. So if you are submitting NIH grant application using Form F, so formerly known as a Form Z, so same outcome measure questions are asked in the form, and it has to be matched with one in the ct.gov registration. So that I hope that I convince you that reporting outcome measure accurately and timely are very, very important. So when you do the CT.gov registration, just remember that publication policy, Congress, and other outside communities are keeping eyes on institution and research group on the listing outcome measures and results reporting in CT.gov accurately and timely. So now we know why, right? So let's talk about outcome measure section. So at the time of CT.gov registration, before you enroll any participants, you are required to list primary and secondary outcomes that are pre-specified in the IRB protocol. So for each outcome, it must include title, description, and time frame. So starting with tip for outcome title. So for outcome title, you need to enter what will be measured, not why. So include the metric and unit information if you can. So for example, if you just say safety of drug A or something, it will not be accepted because it's not clear how you are assessing the safety of drug A. So you need to revise to say safety as measured by number of participants with at least one adverse event, or you can say serious adverse event, something like that. That will be accepted. Tip 2, so title needs to be clear and concise, and you got to omit verbs. So to assess, to evaluate, to determine, you got to remove that because outcome is a noun. So it's different from protocol aim and objective, right? So what I have seen is that investigator or coordinator puts protocol objective, such as we aim to assess the safety of drug A. So that will not be accepted. Outcome measure, again, is a quantifiable study endpoint and should usually have the number in the context. So again, don't just copy protocol aim from the protocol because protocol may not be written to allow cut and pasting into CT.gov. Tip 3, list outcomes separately. So do not list multiple outcomes together. Do not collapse in one line. So in this example, you can list all-cause mortality, hospitalization, ER visit in one outcome line. Each outcome must enter separately, as shown. However, there could be exception if a composite score of multiple measures being used. So in that case, the correct way of writing this specific outcome will be count of individual who experience any of the following, all-cause mortality, and so on. So that will be accepted. So now, outcome description. So here you need to describe how this outcome that you just said in the title is being assessed and quantified. So this does not mean like lab techniques or detailed statistical analysis method. It just means how are you counting what you're measuring? So the tip 1 will be, so a lot of outcome uses scale. Then if that's the case, include the full unabbreviated name of the scale because CT.gov required this information. So in this case, for this outcome, you need to say number of participants who experience higher or equal to grade 3 AE as defined by CTCAE and put version, so version 5. Sorry, but it really needs to be this specific. So you can't just say instance of serious adverse event. That will not be accepted by NIH reviewer. So tip 2, if a score will be used, and then you need to include what the score measures, the range of possible score, and then the meaning of the score. For example, if you're reporting change in pain score using VAS scale, so visual analog scale, description should say VAS scale is a validated subjective measure for acute and chronic pain, range from 0 to 100 and higher score indicating greater pain. So you need to include possible range of score and measure of that specific score. So here's the template that you can use for description. If you're using scale or score for the outcome, please use them. So now tips for the outcome time frame. So this is a little tricky one. You need to describe the specific time point when you will collect the outcome measure data, not the duration of the trial. So you gotta be specific, again, specify the time points when you collect the data, and then not the visit name. So you can't just say end of the trial, post-intervention. That would not be accepted. You need to say week 3 or approximately week 3. So it needs to be very, very specific. Tip 2, if the measure is assessed in relation to an event, for example, this outcome is assessed after surgery. So you need to specify the time in relation to that event. So you need to say day 1, comma, immediately after surgery. You can't just say after surgery. It will come back with stipulation. And then sometimes you are measuring same outcome at multiple time points. So generally, you need to list multiple time points as separate outcome measures unless you are assessing change in outcome between 2 time points. So baseline and then maybe after intervention, or you're assessing the outcome over time. So for using previous example, say your outcome is change in pain score before and after intervention. So you would put in the time frame section baseline, comma, and week 6 or something for time frame. So for those outcome assessed over time, such as time to event types of outcome using survival analysis, then you can say something like hospital admission until discharge, comma, assess up to 28 days. Otherwise, you would need to divide the outcome and then list the outcome separately with the specific time points. Here's the template for the time frame. And so these are examples of commonly used time to event outcome, such as overall survival. So please use this template language for time to event outcomes because they often come back with stipulation. And then these descriptions are just, same, right? Just change the version number, stuff like that. And here are more common examples for your reference, which include commonly used outcome for phase 1 trial. So now let's quickly review ct.gov compliance metrics. So according to FEDA non-compliance trial tracker website, we had a little hiccup last month. So our compliance rate was down to 98% from 100%. But the study team immediately took action to resolve the issue. Record has been corrected and submitted to NIH. So hopefully we'll get back to 100% next month. So please note that UT Southwestern leaderships are periodically reviewing this website. This is a public website. And they are particularly interested in identifying repeated offenders, since this is, again, public website, so which really affects our academic institution's reputation. Also, this website is, this only include compliance for FDA-regulated applicable clinical trial results only. So it does not capture all. So we created this table. So this shows overall real-time compliance for all UT Southwestern records. So basically, blue indicates total number of records registered by UT Southwestern investigator, and then green indicates record without any issue or record that are currently under ct.gov review. And then orange one is the non-FEDA problem record. NIH problem record, and the red ones are the one non-compliance one, which subject to civil and monetary penalties. So I think we're doing pretty good overall compared to previous fiscal years. So thank you all for your hard work to stay in compliance. So now I want to switch a gear and review the sponsor investigator support metrics. So as you know, Regulatory Support Office provides CT.gov support. We also provide IND, IDE, expanded access application support for UT Southwestern sponsor investigator. So if you want to learn more about our program, SI support program, here's a brief summary of our program. And please also check January Research Matter when we did the introduction to sponsor investigator support program. So at UT Southwestern, we have total of approximately 52 IND, active IND, and 4 IDE, which are held by UT Southwestern sponsor investigator. So right now, these figures are just the estimate. We're likely to increase once landscape analysis has been completed. So in February last month, our office assisted submission three IND, in which 1 IND was approved and 2 are in process right now. And then we also assisted with a couple amendments, and metrics to date is here. So it's since June 2021. That's when we formalized the program, and then we start maintaining the database for your reference. So I want to end with, so any CT.gov support related questions or assistance, please send email to CT.gov support inbox, or you can book a consultation with us. And here is a selected list of clinicaltrial.gov resource for your reference. And this is for sponsor investigator, IND, IDE, expanded access related question. Book a free consultation as well. And this is my last slide. So here's the selected list of resource for IND, IDE, EAP support. So this ends my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. I will turn over to Liz. Thank you.
Erica, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. That was a lot of information. So I do encourage the audience to go ahead and type in their questions now in the Q&A if they have anything. And we actually do have 2 questions for you, Erica. So I'm going to ask the first one. Can you clarify who is responsible for reporting outcome requirements on CT.gov? For example, if the pharmaceutical company is the sponsor, does the UT Southwestern PI have to report outcomes?
Yes, so that's a really good question. So usually if it's multi-site study sponsored by industry or pharmaceutical, typically it should be sponsor is the one. So pharmaceutical will be the responsible party unless they delegate to main site PI. So if sponsor didn't say anything, I recommend PI to just double check to see if, okay, this looks like a clinicaltrial.gov registration require study, and then maybe reach out to us because maybe it's already registered by the sponsor, which you can check in the public website. So we can clarify, we can check for that, and then it's better to reach out to our office, and then we can just verify. And then we may ask, okay, this looks like it has not been registered. Check with sponsor, and then they will tell you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I have another question for you. Prior to protocol submission, does our office provide consultation to faculty to refine their outcome measures to ensure easy compliance?
prior to protocol submission, I'm sorry, is that referring to IRB or to study team or to ct.gov? Prior to protocol submission, I guess I'm not understanding.
It's prior to registration. So
can our office consult? Oh yeah, yes, absolutely. We can definitely help. I mean, we can't write the protocol, study endpoint for the PI, but we can definitely give the template so that ct.gov, NIH reviewer will accept. So we can definitely give you the templates, which I include some of the common one today.
Great, thank you for that. And I do have one more. Does your office conduct a mandatory review of outcome measures?
Mandatory review of outcome measure in the ct.gov. Right now we are kind of self-service model, but we plan to start reviewing all study that before they can submit it to ct.gov. We are hoping to not so much of auditing, but to check to see that it will be accepted. But if you have any concern with outcome measure section, we are happy to take a look. So just reach out to us before PI submits. So maybe in the future, but we won't be auditing. We will be just helping study team to register so that it will be accepted.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm getting some great questions, and I do have one more. It's a question and a comment here. So does SI Support submit amendments to the FDA on behalf of the SI? Our IND was recently approved last month, and FDA provided information to register for a next-gen portal.
We can definitely assist. Again, yes, so I think I would like to see the study in more detail, but our office, one thing is we need to monitor all IND activities. So definitely, whoever wrote that question, reach out to us, and it will help you, and then we'll also monitor. We'll definitely help you out with the amendment to FDA.
Okay, thank you so much, Erica. For the sake of time, we're going to jump into our next presentation. Again, if you guys have any questions out there in the audience, please do keep them coming. And Liz, you are welcome to get your presentation going.
Thank you, Erica. Can you see my slides?
Yes, I can.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for attending. My name is Liz Owens. I'm a Senior Regulatory Analyst with the IRB. Today we'll be discussing continuing reviews, regulations, and submissions. Our agenda includes a review of the federal regulations, UT Southwestern HRPP Policy 2.2 for CRs and AUs, preparation steps, and we'll review the first 3 sections of the CRE IRB Smart Forms. And there are also some tips and resources at the end of this presentation. Starting with the federal regulations, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services set forth the following criteria for IRB approval, not only at your initial review, but also at continuing review. And this criteria, as well as additional federal regulations and our institutional policies, speak to the purpose of the questions that we ask in the SMART forms that you'll find in eIRB. And as you'll be able to see how our policy 2.2 aligns with these federal regulations. Reviewing the criteria, risks are minimized by using procedures that are consistent with sound research design and that do not unnecessarily expose subjects to risk, and whenever possible, by using procedures already performed on the subjects for diagnostic or treatment purposes. Studies should have beneficence, meaning that the risks to subjects are reasonable in relation to the anticipated benefits. Selection of subjects is equitable, An example of equitability is not targeting a population or leaving out a population that could benefit from your study unless that's outlined in your inclusion and exclusion criteria. Informed consent will be sought from each prospective subject or the subject's legally authorized representative and appropriately documented in accordance with and to the extent required by law. Informed consent will be appropriately documented or appropriately waived in accordance with the federal regulations. When appropriate, the research plan makes adequate provision for monitoring data collected to ensure the safety of subjects. An example of this is your Data Safety Monitoring Board or Data Safety Monitoring Committee. When appropriate, there are adequate provisions to protect privacy of subjects and to maintain the confidentiality of data. Appropriate safeguards are included to protect subjects likely to be vulnerable to coercion or undue influence. And there may be additional requirements that you have for IRB approval if your research involves pregnant women, fetuses, neonates, prisoners, or children. And now we'll take a look at the Common Rule. The Common Rule was revised. The revised 2018 Common Rule was published on January 19th of 2017, and its effective date of compliance is January 21st of 2019. So we'll go through each column one at a time, starting at the Convene Board. Full board studies are approved for 1 year, and they require continuing review annually. And when the revised rule came, annual updates are for research that is considered to pose minimal risk for participants. So how that changed is that sometimes studies that are under the revised Common Rule may have an annual update if the research has progressed to the point that it involves only one or both of the following: data analysis and or accessing follow-up clinical data from procedures that subjects would undergo as part of their clinical care. And going on to expedited study column, expedited studies approved prior to the Common Rule still require a continuing review. Expedited studies under the revised Common Rule require an annual update unless determined to need a continuing review by the IRB. Exempt studies, you'll see in this column, we have ID for it depends. Exempt studies do not have a continuing review or annual update unless the exempt category requires a limited review by the IRB. Exemption categories 2 and 3 are examples of that. And I've included a link here that says Revised Common Rule Questions and Answers, and those outline all the categories of your expedited and exempt studies. And now moving on to our UT Southwestern HRPP Policy 2.2 on continuing reviews. You'll find a link to the full policy in the resource section at the end of this slide, but we'll be highlighting areas that are specific to our continuing review policy. So unless UT Southwestern determines otherwise, continuing review of research is not required for research approved on or after January 21st, 2019, which meet one of the following criteria. If the research is eligible for expedited review in accordance with federal policies, if the research reviewed by the IRB in accordance with limited IRB review described in 45 CFR 46.104, research that has progressed to the point that it involves only one or both of the following, which are part of the IRB approved study: data analysis, or accessing follow-up clinical data from procedures that subjects would undergo as part of their clinical care. The research protocol must continue to satisfy the criteria that's set forth in the federal regulations that we've reviewed for the IRB to approve the protocol for continuation. IRB approval period can extend no longer than 1 year after the start of the approval period in which the study was approved or conditionally approved. The principal investigator may not continue research after expiration of the IRB approval. Continuation is a federal violation as outlined in the federal requirements. If the IRB approval has expired, the PI must cease all research activity and may not enroll new subjects in the study after the expiration of the IRB approval. The UT Southwestern HRPP will require an annual update when continuing review is not required for studies approved via expedited or convened board review, and may close studies if the annual update is not submitted in a timely manner. The PI must submit CRs and AU reports approximately 1 month prior to expiration for studies as long as the research remains open to enrolling new subjects, continues to carry out research procedures or intervention, or remains active for long-term follow-up, and/or requires analysis of data with identifiers, or for research externally funded, the project is being funded locally. Meetings can fill up quickly, so in addition to it being in our policy, submitting your study at least 30 days before it's due will give us adequate time for meeting assignments, and it'll also give you adequate time for any follow-up questions or requested changes that you may receive from your analyst. And now to review what our 2.2 policy says about expedited continuing reviews. The IRB may use expedited procedures for continuing review under the following circumstances. If your study was initially eligible and continues to be eligible for expedited procedures, or the research is permanently closed to enrollment of new subjects, all subjects have completed all research interventions, and research remains active only for long-term follow-up of subjects, or where no subjects have been enrolled at UT Southwestern and no risks have been identified either at UT Southwestern or any of the participating sites if it's a multi-site study. The only remaining research activities are limited to data analysis, or the IRB previously determined and documented at a convened meeting that the research is no greater than minimal risk, and all of the following are true. No additional risks have been identified, and if the research involves study drug or medical devices, it does not require an IND, an IDE, and/or the device is approved for marketing and being used in accordance with the approved labeling. Administrative review of annual updates. The HRPP department may only administratively review annual updates if the study does not require continuing review as per the institutional guidelines. The HRPPD, IRBD, IRB chair or designee reviews the annual updates. Administrative reviewer ensures the PI provides any significant new findings that may relate to the subject's willingness to continue to participate in accordance with the regulations. And here is a summary of the continuing review procedures by a convening board that are outlined in our policy 2.2. UT Southwestern has designated all UT Southwestern IRBs to review non-exempt human research conducted under its federal-wide assurance. Continuing review of research will be performed by any of the designated IRBs. The HRPPD staff assigns a primary reviewer for each CR based on the IRB's members' education, background, and expertise. For research requiring expertise in multiple areas of science or ethics, additional reviewers may be assigned as determined by the HRPPD staff, IRPD, or chair. In selecting the reviewers, he or she must have appropriate scientific or scholarly expertise. If necessary, ad hoc or cultural consultants with appropriate expertise will be asked to participate in the pre-review and/or IRB review process. All IRB members are responsible for reviewing all information in the review packets in advance of the meeting. The convened IRB makes the final determination on the outcome of the review. The meeting deliberations are documented in meeting minutes. And next we'll talk about the preparation of your continuing review or annual update. In preparation for your review, alert your team if their city training is expired or will be expiring soon. HIPAA is only required one time, but UT Southwestern specific human subject protection and good clinical practice needs to be updated every 3 years. That's if your study requires GCP. Here is a link to City's website. Your City account should have the same institutional email address as is in EIRB. Some common reasons that City training dates might not be correct in EIRB is if your account doesn't have the institutional email address, if you have multiple accounts, or if the system just hasn't had time to update yet. And unless we request them, you won't need to send us your certificates because we should see it in the system. If you do need to have your accounts merged, or you think that the information in City is not correct, here is their contact information, so you can reach out to them and they can assist you with that. Looking at forms, in preparation to submit your continuing review, make sure to give yourself enough time and take a moment to see what was reported in your previous continuing reviews, such as what was the study status, the enrollment numbers, does the study enroll vulnerable populations, does my study have a DSMB, especially if you've acquired your study from a previous coordinator. If your study was approved after the 2018 Common Rule, and the study was approved using the EIRB Lite system, you will need a Form B. This is your personnel form. If your study is a repository, you'll need to include a repository CR supplement form. And if your study has a DSMB, you may need to include a DSMB report if the report was provided. So if your study does need that Form B, make sure to reconcile what we have in EIRB with what you have on your Form B. And now I'll show you how to download that Form B. So this is pretty much what it looks like when you log into your study. I've removed some study-specific data, but you'll go to this Documents folder that's under the red arrow. The first items you see are your approved PDF documents. And then when you scroll down, you'll see the approved study documents that are Word versions. This is where you'll get your Form B to revise for your study. It's also where you'll download documents for modifications. And now we'll look at the first 3 pages of your EIRB Smart Forms. Let's discuss the flow of your study and how that works with the flow of this application. Starting with 1.1, when, for example, when your study first opens, you haven't enrolled anyone yet. Sometimes you get a continuing review and you haven't enrolled anyone yet. And if that's the case, then you would select the first radio button. And if you selected that first radio button, none of the other status options under 1.2 would appear because none of those would apply. And then you start enrolling patients next. You've enrolled participants and you're open to enrollment. So the next option is what is selected in this example. Enrollment of participants at this site is ongoing. And if you selected this option, then status 1 or status 2 would apply. Either status 1, research procedures are currently being performed on at least one subject, or status 2, research procedures are not being currently performed on one subject, but we plan on doing it in the future. And next, after you've completed your study, you've completed at least the enrollment portion of your study, then you may select study is permanently closed to enrollment. And if that's the case, then status 1 or status 3 would apply to your study. And moving on to the other next option listed, study is temporarily closed to enrollment. Enrollment is halted, but will potentially resume. So this option could be selected, for example, if the FDA put a pause on the study for some sort of safety issue, but they haven't closed it yet. If If your study didn't enroll anyone this year, that doesn't mean that you've temporarily closed it. If your study was temporarily closed, then you would select either status option 1 or status option 2. And then moving on to the next option, all study procedures have been completed at this site, and the study remains active only for analysis of identifiable data or long-term follow-up. Any of the statuses could apply to that situation, status 1, 2, or 3. And the last option, remaining research activities are limited to data analysis only. If that's the case in your study and you've selected this, then these status options will not appear. These special protocol types are pretty self-explanatory here. If you have a repository, if you have a planned emergency research, if your study uses a humanitarian device. And now drawing your attention to 1.3. If these criteria don't apply to your study, then the answer should be no, meaning that your study is greater than minimal risk. The way that you answer this question corresponds with a section that I'll show you when we get to section 3.0. You'll have time to elaborate and back up this answer. And this is important, the way that we fill it out, because it helps us determine what type of review that your study needs. Because your study, for example, if you had a full board study and it was time for your continuing review, but you hadn't enrolled anyone yet, that would be an example of when you would select this first option and your study wouldn't need to be reviewed at a full convened board, but could go for a limited review if that was the case. I also wanted to point out that there is a help function in the top right corner where that red arrow is located. And if you press on that, the following help comes up. I just wanted you to be aware that that is there, and it provides some more specific definitions about each of the criteria. Moving on to section 2.0, enrollment. The first couple of questions here are auto-populated, and then you begin entering your data in section 2.2.1. In this section, this should be the total number of subjects at last year's review. 2.2.2 is your enrollment since that time, and the numbers in 2.2.3 should be these two sections added together. In addition to that, section 2.2.4, which is your active subjects, 2.2.5, which is your completed subjects, and 2.2.7, your total withdrawals. These numbers should also add up to equal the number that's in 2.2.3. So each one of your subjects should just go into one of those categories and each count one time. And now we'll look at section 3.0. In section 3, having accurate responses in these sections, as previously mentioned, helps us determine whether there are ongoing procedures that require a convened board review, in the case if you have a full board study. And how you answered 1.3 is supported in 3.2. So please complete 3.2, outlining what the follow-up procedures are and and whether or not those are for research or are for standard of care. And now for some additional tips. Be mindful when submitting modifications near time of your continuing review, because you can only have a continuing review or a modification open at the same time. You can only have one or the other. So we recommend not submitting your modification within 8 weeks of your study's expiration, just to be on the safe side. Regular review of your queue will not only help you to submit your continuing reviews in a timely manner, but it'll also let you know if you were mistakenly added to a study or if you were not added to a study that you should have been added to. The SMART forms ask you questions about your PERSOs, patient safety, and deviations. So we do want those information on those sections that ask for those summaries, but we don't require or validate deviation logs or adverse event logs. Review of anonymous data is not considered human research. So if your PI believes that the study falls into this category, please reach out to us to discuss the possibility of closing your study. And that way you're not putting in that effort and work if it's not necessary. And just one more reminder, HRPP policy states that any studies that are inactive for a period of 3 years or longer should be closed, or the PI has to provide justification for keeping the study open. Here are some helpful resources, both for the federal guidelines that we discussed, the federal guidelines included in our 2.2 internal policy, and then also the complete policy and procedure library, as well as the complete 2.2 CR policy. Thank you all so much for being here. Feel free to reach out to us individually if you have questions, but also here is our main site. We also have open office hours every Tuesday and Thursday from 10 to 11 a.m. If you're not familiar with this and you would like to sign up for our listserv, there is a link here for you to receive updates for access to that open hours. Thank you all so much for attending today.
Thank you, Liz, for that presentation. I know that was a lot of information, and we are getting some questions come through in our Q&A, so I do encourage you all to send them now. And I would like to specifically ask some questions for Eric, our HRPP program manager. We're getting a lot of questions surrounding, when a modification should be submitted. So Eric, would you like to clarify some of these questions that we're seeing?
Yes, I would. Hi, everybody. So we do see situations, I know you're familiar with this community here, that when modifications are submitted too close in proximity to when the CR is due, you will see our HRV staff ask you to withdraw that mod so that the CR can be reviewed and approved prior to expiration. And so be very cognizant of when you're submitting a mod to ensure it's not 30 days outside of the expiration date from the study. Because the board, if they're full board, in addition to our staff for expedited submissions, they still need the time to review your CR. While they might be able to review them quickly, the full board still requires that that's submitted and then reviewed by a reviewing member and then presented at that full board meeting. So we don't want your studies to expire. So please be cognizant of when you submit those modifications.
And Eric, if they receive a modification and a continuing review at the same time, what is the recommended? What should they do first?
Well, so my answer is going to be it depends. It depends on what it's in the modification. If it's safety concerns, I'd ask you to reach out to the staff, reach out to me, so we can discuss and walk through that process. But again, if the modifications are minor, submit that continuing review so that your study doesn't expire, because we don't want to have studies lapse. We need to prevent that from happening.
Okay, thank you. One more moment. I do believe there's one more question.
Oh, in addition, just so everyone is on the same page, you are not allowed or not able to, because the system doesn't allow it, to submit a modification at the same time as continuing review. We can't do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just checking out this one last question here. It's saying in section 2.0, for the question about the number of subjects who have completed the study, what is the IRB's definition of completed? Is this subjects who have completed the intervention but remain in follow-up, or those who are totally done with all participation in the study, including follow-up periods?
So when a subject has completed a study, our definition is when they are completed with all procedures that are research related, and they're out of the study. So no more, they've stopped taking study drug, they're no longer in follow-up, and you've obtained all the data you need from them, and they're no longer in the study participating.
Okay, thank you. So far I still don't see any other questions. And while we're sitting on this slide, I want to just take a moment to remind you that we do have a survey, and we would like you to take a few minutes to complete these questions for us, which will help us improve the content of these sessions and how we present them. It will also give us a better idea on what areas we need to work on in the office and what areas we are excelling at. So I'm going to just check one last time for any other questions. And
So there is a question I see, Erica. Can you submit a personnel modification while continuing review is in progress? So we no longer accept modifications for changing personnel because there's the add and remove functionality now in the system. But what we do ask you for, any study that's in the EIRB Lite application, that at the time of continuing review, if there have been changes through that approval period, that you submit an updated Form B, and you're going to upload that in the last section of the CR. I believe it's section 14 and specifically item 14.2.
okay, thank you for clarifying that for them. We just have a few more moments, but if there aren't any other questions that come through right now, we can still take some while after this has concluded. I do want to thank everyone who presented today, and thank all the attendees for attending today's session. Our next Research Matters session is scheduled on April 19th. And I hope you guys all have a great rest of your week. So thank you all very much.